Alrighty, so I've been playing a little bit with my VS Code today and last night, and partially because of the stream, partially because I wanted to just kind of rethink some of the things in it. It's been a while since I changed any of my processes when working, right? And then I realized that what we should probably be using, at least for Programming Network, but I think you guys in general, especially if you have projects which are not monolithic, right? So where you have an API and your front end separated, like we do here for Programming Network. So I think using workspaces actually turned out to be great for this specific scenario, and I'm going to show you why. So we're going to discuss now several things, a debugger and how to run this whole kind of thing as almost one monorepo. But also some changes that I made to the layout of my, as you can see, of my VS Code, right? So let's just start with some few visual things because this is a very common question in the streams. So the first question that people ask me when it comes to VS Code is like, hey, why do you have, well, actually, first question that they ask is like, what is this editor? Because people get confused that my sidebar in VS Code is on the right side, not on the left side. And there's two reasons for that. Number one, I don't think that the context of the sidebar is important enough to occupy your most important part of the screen, which is the left side where you generally read your code. And number two, if you keep your sidebar to the left, your code would be jumping when you open it. So for example, if we just very quickly demonstrate that, right? So if we move this primary sidebar to the left, you can see as I'm opening and closing it, my code is jumping. And this is very annoying. It's annoying for me as I work, but it's also annoying for my viewers on Twitch, for example, or YouTube. You can see that it's not a very nice effect. So that's the main question to answer here. Now, one addition to my setup here is you can see that I'm using this additional sidebar in VS Code now. So VS Code, in one of the recent releases, they have released this secondary sidebar. You can actually go to view here, I believe in appearance, or was it? Yeah. And then you can see here you have secondary sidebar. You can also use a command or Control Alt and B to show it, and I'm using it now primarily for GitHub Copilot chat, and we're going to discuss that in a moment. But what actually the essence of this video is debugger. So for example, if I show you now, if I hit F5, I'm essentially running my API, my front end, and then I have a debugger attached to my front end in one click, basically in one button click. This is great because, and this is what I think the main benefit of workspace is that you can now execute this almost as a one specific repo, even though these things are completely separate. So you can see now, for example, let's imagine that I wanted to debug anything really. So let's maybe go to my profile here, for instance, and let's just say, hey, break here when this is loading, right? So what I'm going to do, I'm going to set up a breakpoint. Hopefully, am I actually running this? I am. So I'm gonna go here to this line and try setting up something. Feels a little bit off. Let me see. Let me just stop this and restart it again. So I'm gonna try putting a breakpoint now here. I'm gonna hit F5, right? And we're gonna wait a little bit until obviously everything starts. I'm gonna show you how it works. Then if I log into my actual project here, and yeah, now if I go to my profile, for example, that's wrong, go to profile, you'll see that we now broke here, right? And you can see here, so for example, I can now, obviously, hopefully, if you guys don't know, every debugger from 30 years ago onwards works very similar. You have a call stack, you have stack traces and stuff, but then you have things you can watch on. So for example, here I can say now I broke at a certain point. I kind of stop execution of code at this time. Let me inspect some variables. As you can see here now, I'm inspecting this authenticated user, this thing that I'm getting from this Redux store, right? And I'm checking its contents, right? Then of course, I can keep on slamming more breakpoints as this execution of this program goes. I can do this, and then it's going to break. As you can see, there is probably several re-renders. Now I'm here checking if there's no profile. You get the point. Now the great thing about this, let's actually just remove all these breakpoints and let's just let it run, and our front end should actually load. The great thing now about this setup is that you can do the same in the API. So if I search for this /me, the same thing where we broke just in the front end, I can come here and say, okay, I want to actually break when user goes to their own profile and try to load their information from the API. So if I refresh this now, we can actually see that this is going to be spinning infinitely, almost as you kind of stopped it intentionally. And then if we go back here to my API now, to my Fastify API, you can see that we actually did break here on line 55. And I can say, okay, let me see what this user object is, right? And we can see that this is some SQLized document, right? So how do I know? Well, because I can recognize these data values. This is this object just illustrates that it's right. So I can actually say, okay, well, actually user.data values, right? And now I can inspect that. So this is just the very basic details of the debugger. But the point here is that there are two very fundamentally awesome things. One, you can set your workspace up to be you can just run everything in one command. If you remember before from my existing streams or previous streams, sorry, I would open two different terminals. I would go to my API directory. I would run pm dev. Then I would go to my front end directory. I would run pm dev as well. So I would have those two different processes running right now. Kind of this is optimized by simply pressing F5 and running these things all at once, and amazingly having a debugger attached to it. Now, how does this work? How do you set this up? It's very simple. So you're gonna create a workspace. Generally, the way you create a workspace, you go to File, New. You open some project and then you say add folder to workspace. So and then eventually you save that workspace, you give it some name. It's just basically a file, a metadata file that references to that specific thing. And that looks like this. You can see here programmer-network.code.workspace, and this workspace defines what it is. You can see here essentially that it defines, hey, this workspace has two different folders, and then it has some launch configuration for the debugger. And that is what I just showed you. So as you can see here, I'm going to show you how I did it so you can do it in your own project as well. So the API configuration is very simple. Type has to be Node because this is a Node.js project. Request has to be launch because we want to launch some binary, some executable. And as you can see here, we're running the pnpm as executable. In your case, this could be bun.js, yarn, npm, whatever. And then we are giving the argument to it, which is a dev thing, right? So pnpm dev, right? If I actually go to my API package.json here, you'll see in fact that I do have a dev script here. So it's going to run pnpm dev, which is basically just an alias to running nodemon and the rest of it. Now, it's very imperative that if you want to use a debugger in your Node.js application, you do have to provide this argument inspect and then 000 and then some port, because this is how debugger is going to get attached to your process, right? So this is imperative for your API. Now the rest of the things, current working directory, this is basically you have to provide where your project is. This workspace folder is basically environmental variable in VSCode and defines your workspace, like root of your workspace, and then you provide the folder inside of that workspace. So you can see here that if I minimize these fellas over here in my workspace, so this is my root, and in my workspace I have this folder and this folder here, right? So that's essentially what this means. You can omit these things. Essentially, there's just what is the node version, the root node version, environment that you want to execute this in, and very imperative for the API as well. Most APIs, I hope, if you're building APIs, that you're using environmental variables, so you have to give it an env file to source before the process executes, right? So in simple words, if I go to my API, you will notice here that I have env development env file that's basically used in development, right? So that's pretty much all you have to do for the API. Now for the front end, it's not too different, right? So it's the same for my Vite project. So if I go to my package.json on my front end, you'll notice here that we also have the dev. This is a standard Vite configuration, so nothing special. pnpm dev, so you can see here, hey, start my Vite project, launch it as well, pnpm dev, provide the current working directory, and then the last step is actually, once that is running, to attach a debugger. And you saw when I press F5 here that we get this Chrome window opened, right? Well, that's actually what's happening in here, right? We're essentially launching a Chrome instance that's gonna basically attach we're basically adding a debugger on this process in here, right? And then the compound thing essentially defines the configurations that run together. This is the kind of the magic where pressing F5 runs them together. So we're just saying here, hey, this is a compound configuration, and it composes of the API, start frontend, and then debug frontend, and default true. What is this default true? That's essentially what's shown in here in this list when you open your run and debug window here in your sidebar. So if I set this default true to some of the other fellas here, they will by default be selected, right? The reason why this is very important is that when you open your workspace, you can just press F5 and it's that compound configuration that's going to be loaded for you automatically. Now, the only negative thing that annoys me right now about VS Code is that there's no command to kill all of the running processes that your debugger has started. So if you want to stop these three things, you have to click once, in my case 3 times, 1, 2, and I think 2 or 3 times to stop them. So it would be cool. Hopefully VS Code team is going to implement this. So just as you're pressing F5, maybe you can bind some shortcut to just kill the debugger completely. And I'm sure that we could do that ourselves, maybe write some shell script or whatever, and then, execute it through some plugin, and then, but that would be work that's not worth the time investment, right? Okay, so this is basically the configuration. This is how you can run it. There's one last detail that you have to do in your Vite config in case you're using Vite, and that is you need to make sure that your source maps are generated. It's very common that people use environmental variables here. I didn't do that. I basically use this command, the argument from here. As you can see, this command argument can either be build or serve. You generally write Vite build for production and Vite serve for development. So here we're just saying, hey, if the command that Vite is ran by currently served, that means it's development. Then inject the inline source maps, so they're going to be injected alongside the files. They're not going to be separate files, separate source maps like something x map.js, blah, blah, blah. And if it's not serve, meaning if it's build, if it's production, don't generate the source map. Now, of course, there's some companies, some projects that do generate source maps in production as well. I don't do that for Programming Network because I literally don't want to expose my whole front-end code to the public. But I've seen that before. So that's basically it, right? So I think this is super good. I think we're going to be using this. Maybe before we just proceed here, I think it's very important to mention why did I start using a chat, GitHub Copilot chat here to the left. I think mainly because of this workspace kind of decorator or tag that they have added. Because as the Copilot learns the more context about this project, and now we are in the context of a workspace, then it's going to be able to understand better the relation between my client and my API, and then give me better insights because it has the, I will be opening the files in the same workspace. So I think the beauty of it is that as we write more code now between both of the ends, it will have more context to learn from, right? So this is kind of the addition. For those of you who might ask, hey Alex, what is this background? What is the theme and stuff? I'm using a few extensions here in the VS Code. You can actually take a look at them. The background extension that I'm using is called background, and this enables me to add this transparency to VS Code and to use the background. I'm using this theme called Cat Puchin for VS Code. I'm using the default icon, so I'm not using any icons. There are a few other extensions that I'm using that are absolutely mandatory every day in my work. I use Turbo Console, so you've seen me in my streams, sometimes pressing a shortcut and just generating this, and I can also remove it in the same way. I have key bindings for this. I press Shift, Control, and 1 or 2, right, to do it. So I can do, you can see this, and then I can remove them all. So this is essentially Turbo Console. I'm using CodeSnap to sometimes generate screenshots of the code. This is my favorite and the most useful plugin I'm using. I use it for Postgres and Redis and even MongoDB. Many of you know it from my streams. We use it daily. And then there are some other things. One is called Error Lens. This is probably the one that I get asked the most about in my streams. Like, hey, Alex, how do you get these red lines next to things, right? Like this replace, right? That is Error Lens. Then if we see a few more, obviously Windows Linux subsystem one, so VSL is actually working. ESLint, this is standard stuff. Import cost for showing how big a library is. You can see here it says 7,007K, gzip 2.7K. Postman, we use Postman for testing the testing things, sending requests. As you can see, we have a lot of stuff here. So this is kind of the core of what I use. Since I want to keep this video very short, I'm going to say that's all for today. I hope that you can utilize what I've kind of learned here myself, or the way that I reorganized my workspace. I wish you guys the best. Stay tuned, and that's all for today. I'll see you guys in the next stream, and have a great one. Peace out. Bye-bye. Cheers.